right, good evening. Good to see everybody out tonight. It is time to go ahead and begin. And before we do, of course, we're going to have a word of prayer, so let's bow in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for the day. We're thankful, Lord, for the blessing of being here with like-minded believers. We're thankful for the Word. We're grateful, Lord, for what it means to us, that we can better understand it, and by doing so, better understand your will for us in our lives. We're thankful for your people of faith that you put in place to bring about the coming of the Christ, and we are thankful for their faithfulness, and we're thankful for their example for us. We ask, Lord, that you bless those that are not here tonight, or for whatever reason it may be, that they're maybe under the weather or we're unable to be here for whatever reason. We pray, Lord, your blessings on them. If they're sick, Lord, we ask that you give them healing. And we look forward to seeing them next week. We thank you for everything that you do for us, but we're especially thankful for the gift of your Son, Jesus. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. All right, Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. We're going to go backwards. I know you're thinking, well, hold on. We've got to Genesis 11. Don't go backwards. We're going to go backwards just a little bit, because what's going to happen in Genesis chapter 11, actually Genesis chapter 12, but at the end of Genesis chapter 11, what many scholars believe this is like a breaking off point. Now the narrative changes a little bit. It looks less and less like mythology, and now it looks more like a simple history lesson. We're just talking about as we go through the rise of Abram and the lineage of Jesus Christ, that the way that reads changes a little bit. A lot of people think that this was the point where once one author left off and another author began. We don't believe that. I mean, at least I don't believe that, and I think we're probably on the same page as far as this is concerned. So, but at this point we want to go backwards, because in chapter 12, as we talk about the ascendancy of Abram to the forefront of the Genesis narrative, we got to go back, because the major portion of Abram's participation in this is to further the lineage and to continue that lineage and continue to pass that down so that there would be a Messiah. And that's where we're going with this. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. And we're going to look at this. We talked about as Adam and Eve sinned, God pronounced certain judgment on them and pronounced what you would call, I don't know if it's necessarily a cursing, but he pronounced a judgment on them. With the serpent, on the other hand, he pronounced a curse. Okay? And let's look at this. And we're mainly looking at verse 15. We're not looking so much as the concept of him going on his belly the rest of his days and licking up the dust. We're mainly looking at the last portion of this in chapter 3 and verse 15. And it says, I will put what? Enmity. What's enmity? It's a strife, it's a division. I wouldn't get too hung up on exactly a one-word description of what enmity is. It involves a lot. When we have, it's possible for brethren to have enmity between one another, right? It means there's something going on that divides us, that separates us, and if we allow it to, it can completely separate us for all time. There can be enmity between us and God. There can be enmity between all manner of different things. But here we're talking about, he says, I'm going to put enmity between who? Who does he say? Between you and what?
The woman.
The woman. Now, here's the thing. A lot of folks simply believe that this is the first example, or this is the beginning of the, I'll say the societal dislike of serpents, the societal dislike of snakes. And if you ask most ladies and a great many men, there is still enmity between them and the serpent. Okay, that's certainly understandable. They believe that it is simply the idea of for lack of a better word, almost like a personality clash. I don't like that snake. But here's the thing, the snake doesn't have anything against snake. We're just a human being to the snake. Snake doesn't have anything against us. He's a simple creature. He looks at us, he's more scared of us than we are of him, for the most part. Okay, I can't say that all the time, but for the most part, he's more scared of us than we are of him. But here he says, I'm going to create enmity between you and the serpent, or between thee and the woman, and between what? Her seed and your seed. Okay, so this goes, obviously this does not stop at the garden. This is not talking about this particular woman and this particular serpent. This is talking about a seed. What is the idea behind seed? It says, well, I'm going to put it between your seed and her seed. How far out does that extend? In perpetuity, right? There's always going to be enmity between the seed of woman and the seed of the serpent. Now, let's go a little bit further. It says, after that, he said, between thy seed and her seed, and he shall bruise your head. So the seed of the woman is going to bruise the head of the serpent. All right? And we're looking at this, we're talking about a kind of a figurative language here that's going on here. But the serpent is not going to, he's not going to get away with that scot-free, because it says that the seed of the serpent is going to do what?
Bruise his heel.
Bruise his heel. All right. So let's think about this for just a couple of moments. All right. The key to understanding the Old Testament is Jesus Christ. Pure and simple. If we want to understand the Old Testament, we have to look at it within the context of understanding that all of the narrative of the Old Testament, it all funnels down to the New Testament. It all funnels down to Jesus Christ. Every bit of it. Okay? There are some incidentals that we look at and we think, well, that in particular necessarily won't address the coming of the Christ. It won't necessarily address the Messiah. But the overarching narrative of the Old Testament, with all of its genealogies and all of its covenants and all of its law and all of that, all comes into play with a focus and a lens through which we find the Messiah. Has anybody ever heard there's an old saying, and it certainly didn't originate with me, and I don't remember how far back it goes, but it says that the new is in the old concealed, and the old is in the new revealed. Okay? I always thought that was a pretty clever way of saying it. So everything that we find in the New Testament, we find originally in the Old Testament, but it's hidden, right? It's hidden in types and antitypes. It's hidden in figurative language. It's hidden in all of the trappings of the old law, and it comes to light. It's exposed. It was a mystery then, and now it is exposed for everybody to see. And that was the whole point behind it. It was all to lead up to. But then, as we said, that everything that's in the new is in the old, and then as it's carried forward, all of a sudden it's like a little light bulb proverbially goes over somebody's head, and it's opened up. And we say, now we understand. I did a lesson not too long ago. It was talking about, well, we mentioned it in here, the idea of marriage. Why would God say, hey, I want you to have one man and one woman for life, and you're going to have children, and you're going to procreate, and you're going to have families and all of this kind of stuff. And the two of you are going to be joined in a very, very unusual, peculiar fashion, and it's exclusively within the marriage relationship. And we think, why would God do that if He wants us to be fruitful and multiply and fill up the world? Why in the world would He limit one man to one woman with a chance that what if one of them can't have children? That's all right, you're going to be married. That's your position. Why would He do that? Well, the whole point behind the marriage relationship, the reason that He brought those two together was so that it would point towards a very particular union that we find in the New Testament, which is what? The union between, what's that? Christ and His church. Okay. All right, so with that in mind, the idea of understanding the Old Testament is through the lens of Jesus Christ. Now, we look at the terminology of this verse, and again, you have folks that say, well, it's just talking about the fact that women don't like snakes and snakes don't like women and the two don't get along. That would be a very childish way of looking at it, although it's true. I don't know too many ladies that like snakes. My wife likes them from afar, but that's about as far as it gets. Okay? So we have to look at the terminology of this verse, and we have to. I don't know if anybody would disagree with this. I don't think so, because every reasonable biblical scholar that I've read, and everything that I've read, everything that I've sifted through and looked at and tried to figure out about this verse, it can't mean anything other than the long spiritual conflict between Jesus Christ and Satan. The idea, because if you look at it, the idea of the seed, it's a definite article, the seed. There's one. So it's all with the coming of Jesus Christ in mind. That is the seed that we're talking about. So then if we look at it this direction, I tell you what, let's go a little bit further on. Let's break it down a little bit further, because as we said, we're going to see here where Abram is called by God, and he's going to establish a covenant with him. He's going to cut a covenant with him. It's a threefold covenant, and it is a land promise, there's a nation promise, and then there is a seed promise. Okay, so that's important that we understand what the idea of doing seed. All right, so let's break it down. Between thee and the woman, number one, woman stands for the whole of Adam's race. Everybody that is derived from this man and this woman who were there in the garden at the very beginning. It is the entirety of that lineage that goes all the way down through. Now it narrows, doesn't it? It gets to a point where everything else, while they exist and while they live, they have their being on earth the same as everybody else. All of a sudden it becomes very, very narrow, and then there's a lineage, there's a descendancy that comes down, and you have one person that's the child of promise, and then that person gives rise to another, and so forth and so on, and eventually we go through the genealogies that we find in Matthew and we find in Luke, and we see where this all comes down, and it narrows down, and it goes steadily straightforward, person to person to person to person to person, and finally with the Christ. All right? So the woman here stands for the whole of Adam's race, and we find that in chapter 3 and verse 20, where it states that Adam is the mother of all living. That's how she's designated. She's the mother of all who live. Okay, so the enmity that we find here indicates a hostility between Satan towards humanity. Now, if you want to go through some of the extra biblical writings, it attempts to explain why Satan is so angry with God. And I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to bring anything. I'll let you do that reading if you want to. But remember, when you do those kind of readings, eat the meat, spit out the bones. And there's a lot of bones, so you've got to be very careful about it. But if we're mature Christians, we can read that and it's not going to shake our faith. We're just going to go, okay, they're attempting to explain something a little bit further. And simply because it's not in the Scripture doesn't mean that there's not some truth in it. It just simply means that it is not accepted as holy truth and divinely inspired. So we've got to be careful about that. All right? So this enmity indicates a hostility of Satan towards humanity. He doesn't love us. Satan does not love us. And you can go into all of the different reasons. A lot of it has to do with the reason that Satan has been cast down. He's no longer part of the heavenly cohort, so to speak. Why that happened, when it happened, so forth and so on. But the essence of it is that Satan hates humanity. It could be that God, because God loves us so much and that God redeems us, He wants us to be even higher than the angels. I don't know. And I'm very hesitant about saying this is why I think it is. But suffice it to say, from the very beginning, it calls Satan a liar and a murderer. And who is his ire and where is his activity directed towards? It's not directed towards God. It's directed towards us. He wants us to die, and he wants us to be lost. He wants us to be in that lake of fire with him. That lake of fire that was prepared for him and his angels. He wants us there with him. I think that's a very telling thing as well. That lake of fire was prepared for him. God didn't put it in place for us, and then Satan is going to be added to it. It was prepared for Satan and his angels, and those of us who are not faithful, and those of us who are outside Christ will find ourselves there. But it was prepared for Satan and his angels. So that tells us that not only does Satan hate us, but that God is angry with Satan, and he is going to be punished for what he's done. He will not escape punishment. Has anybody ever heard... I know you've heard it. You've probably seen or read things, and you've seen TV shows and everything that shows this hellscape where the landscape is, punishment, torment, everything like that. But it shows Satan as ruling supreme in hell. That he has some sort of a kingship in hell. And that's the way I think popular culture likes to show it. And I've heard people say, these guys think that they're so big and they're so bad, and they're talking about, I'm going straight to hell, and I'm going to be, before long, I'm going to be second in command. Because I'm that mad, I'm that bad, I'm that evil. And and they have no idea that when they get there, that they're going to be in a lake of fire, and Satan's going to be right there with them. He's not being rewarded with a kingship, he's being punished for what he's done. So there's this enmity that has arisen between man and himself, and it manifests itself in the activities of Satan and his angels. The desire to pull us away, to cause us to sin. He tempts us in every way possible. So here's where we are. So God's statement here that He's going to put enmity doesn't mean that it didn't exist earlier than this, but it's going to be intensified. It's going to be continued. And we find that in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 12. If you want to write that down, it's one of the verses to back that up. That activity is going to be intensified, it's going to be amped up, and it's going to be, going to get worse and worse and worse. It also means that wherever God's will is done, the world is going to hate it. And we find that all the time. Whenever we do the right thing, there's a great portion of the world that hates us for doing it. He says the world's going to hate you, but remember, it hated me first. And Jesus make that very clear. If you think the world hated you, it's hated me before. And it also tells us a little bit about the idea of the pre-existence of Christ. The world has hated Christ from the very beginning because of what He is and who He is and what He represents. He represents the acknowledgement of evil in the world. He also acknowledges the understanding that there's only one way in which to come to God. All right? So, Luke chapter 12, verse 51, Jesus Himself tells us that He came to bring what? Do you think I came to bring peace? No. I came to bring division. So, this is the way that it is. All right, but this warfare that we read about is more than Satan on some sort of a campaign to destroy humanity. It also describes the warfare between the followers of Satan and the seed of the woman. All right, so as we said just a couple of seconds ago, note the singular here. That is the seed of woman, the one. All right, and it's a characteristic we find it continued. It says, "He shall bruise thy head." So, who must the seed of woman be? Jesus. Even if it's farther down, generations down the road, the seed of woman is Jesus Christ. Absolutely. Galatians 4:4, Paul states that Christ was to be made of a woman. So it not only implies the virgin birth of Jesus, but also His pre-existence. He was in existence before, and then He is born into the world through a woman. All right, He shall bruise thy head. The idea here is it's a promise. It's of ultimate and complete victory over evil by Jesus Christ. Complete and total victory. There's no halfway here. There was nothing be fought to a draw. There will be complete and total victory over evil. And where did that take place? On the cross, right? The cross of Calvary, where Jesus took away them that had the power of death. Hebrews 2, verse 14. So redemption was achieved on the cross, and the rewards that come from that redemption are going to be bestowed on the righteous at the time of judgment. Which tells us that the war has been won, but we've still got a lot of battles to go. And your battle may not be my battle, but there's a lot of battles we're going to have to go through. But the war itself has already been won. It is not in doubt. It has already been accomplished. And of course, if He shall bruise thy head was Jesus conquering evil, conquering sin on the cross, then thou shalt bruise his heel is a reference to the crucifixion. Satan won briefly. And I don't even really like to say he won. He accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. Let's say it like that, because he didn't win, but he accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. He wanted Satan dead, and he hoped that this would destroy this early church. But through the power of God, Jesus is resurrected, and basically all of the machinations of Satan and his helpers throughout that entire time amounted to really nothing more than a bruised heel. That's it. All right. Any questions about that? Yes, sir.
The reference of bruise. Can you elaborate? I don't. It just seems vague, I guess. But what you're saying is that Satan bruised the head of Jesus, in that he conquered what he wanted.
Jesus bruised the head of Satan.
Right.
Right. And Satan bruised the heel of Jesus.
Sorry,
Yes.
heel.
No, yeah, you're right. You gotcha. Gotcha. So the idea here is when we think about the idea of bruise, what do we think of? We're thinking about, I hit my arm and now I've got this little purple blotch, and it means a great deal more when you read it in the original language. This is more than simply I got hurt. When he says he shall bruise thy head, that means that the head of Satan is going to be crushed.
Okay.
And when you read it in that way, it makes a little bit, it comes across a little bit more as a permanent type of thing, rather than, well, you just hit, because I've had my head bruised and you get over it and the bruise goes away and you're fine. But the idea here is that this is not just merely a temporary thing, this is a permanent thing. It does not mean that Satan is destroyed at the cross. It simply means that the power of sin over mankind is now done. It's gone. So what did really Satan have on us? What was his big thing? It's to keep us from going to heaven. It's to keep us from the truth. It's to keep Jesus from dying so that his blood could avail us of our salvation. Well, that's been taken out of the way. Satan has no more real power. Doesn't mean that we don't watch out for him. It doesn't mean that we don't be on the lookout for him. It doesn't mean that we don't flee when he enters in the room. We certainly do. But it means that he no longer has power over us. And the idea that Satan is able to hurt but not destroy Jesus Christ, which was obvious. But Satan never really destroys the power of Satan at the cross. And there's nothing more for it.
Yeah.
It's done.
It's interesting because my translation says that it says, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says, he will crush your head, and you will strike his heel.
Okay. And that makes a little bit more sense when it says it crushed.
Yeah.
It's just a different translation. That's all it is. And I like the term crush, or there's another and I'm trying to remember what the other translation is. It says it's not crush, but it's essentially the same thing. Well, crushing somebody's head versus bruising their heel is a big difference. Big difference. And the whole point, again, is not that he doesn't destroy Satan, because Satan is going to go into that lake of fire, but he removes his power over death. He removes his power over mankind. So he cannot. He doesn't have that power. God takes that away from him. He destroys his ability for sin to keep us away from him. All right. Anybody else got anything else they want to add to that? Because we're going to get into chapter 12. All right. So last part of chapter 11. You don't have to turn there. You can stay at chapter 12 if you want to. But we're going to look at this. So the lineage, we know that there were Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and the lineage of Christ is going to come through which son? Shem. All right. So we're going to look at chapter. I'll read this if you want to keep it chapter 12. But in chapter 11 and verse 10, it says, "These are the generations of Shem." We're going forward in perpetuity until we get to the coming of the Christ. The generations of Shem, when Shem was 100, he fathered Arpachshad 2 years after. And after he fathered him, he lived 500 years. And we're just going to jump here. Arpachshad fathered Shelah. Shelah fathered Aber. Aber fathered Peleg. And interesting, just a little factoid, Peleg means divided. So he was alive during the time when the tower was erected and the people were dispersed. The land was divided, so to speak. So Peleg fathered Reu. Reu fathered Serug. Serug fathered Nahor. This is not the son of Terah. This is a different Nahor. They use names here and there. He fathered Nahor. Nahor fathered Terah. And when Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. He fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran fathered Lot. So we know that Lot is Abram's first nephew. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldees. How many people here have heard that God called Abram out of the Ur of the Chaldees? Most people have heard it that way, but he doesn't. He actually calls them out of Haran, because we're going to see here that Terah had taken his family, everybody that he was responsible for as patriarch, and they had already left Ur of the Chaldees. They had moved, they were headed towards Canaan. So he said let's see, verse 29, Abram and Nahor take wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarah was barren, and she had no child. All right, so that kind of like puts a punctuation mark right there. And verse 31 actually kind of carries over into chapter 12. So what I did was I did this, because there's a little bit of confusion, not too many people, and it depends on who you talk to. The Jews have their own, it's called the Midrash, and it's a rabbinical reading of the Talmud. It's got some exposition in there. Some of it is fairly reliable. A lot of it is conjecture on their part. Okay, so we got to be careful about that. But remember, it's rabbinical in nature, and it's a rabbinical exegesis of the Talmud. Well, when you've got very human men that are doing an exegesis, sometimes they can get it wrong. We're not worried. It's interesting that in the New Testament it says, don't worry about genealogies. Don't get hung up in all that, talking to the early Christians. Okay? Part of it is this. It's like, well, it no longer matters who you come from. All of that was important only in that it led up to the Christ. After that, what tribe you were from, who your parents were, makes absolutely no difference. And it's the same way for us. We can be proud of our family line. How many people here know where they come from? Have anybody ever done the what is it called? 23andMe? I knew I was going to get that wrong. I keep wanting to do that. I've been told that I have Viking lineage. You wouldn't know it to look at me. But I've heard that I have Viking lineage. I'd love to find out if that's true or not. But at the end of the day, if I never find out where I come from, it matters absolutely nothing. Be proud of your heritage if you know where that is, but don't get hung up on that. So we got two ways of looking at it. A lot of people are asking where, because later Abram says, tell everybody that you're my sister, and was he being partially true? Was he being partially accurate? Yeah. He thought he was pulling a fast one. He thought he's scared for himself. He's worried that he's going to be killed. Hey, if they think that we're married, you're going to kill me and they're going to take you anyway. So, hey, tell everybody that you're my sister. I'm assuming that had some sort of an impact on the people that were interested in Sarai. Okay? But at the end of the day, she was his spouse, but also his half-sister. And we'll look at that here in just a couple minutes. Here's the chart of lineage, and this is just a real quick one. I'm going to make some slides, by the way. You notice that we don't have slides tonight. My PowerPoint account, I got to figure this out when I get home. I'm going to set up a Google Doc, and I'll send you the link to it so that you can get on there and you can look at all the slides. As I get them done, you can get to them. You can take a look at them and tell me what, send me an email and ask me questions, whatever you want to. Not to get into it a whole lot, it's not that big of a deal, as we've said. So we got two. There's two different ways that there are those who, getting back to the idea of the Midrash, the exegesis of the Talmud rabbis, they believe that Sarai was actually the sister of Lot, who was born to Haran. And then you have Abram, who, of course, when he married Sarai, all right, that's where we get Isaac from. But you'll notice over here we got Nahor, who had a son named Bethuel, who ended up with two children, Rebekah and Laban. Of course, they're going to come into play a little bit later on. Very interesting, the fact that Abram says, I don't want you to go get a wife for my son from the people that were around. I want you to go back and get one from my family. For whatever reason. It could be that even though his family may not have been firm and fast believers and practitioners of monotheism, it was preferable to the wickedness that he found around him in Canaan and the lands that he found himself sojourning in, which is probably most likely. He said, hey, as bad as these people are, and I know how bad they are, it's better for you to get it from there, because at least there's a tenuous grasp on the belief of Jehovah God. All right. But then the alternative to that, if she was not the sister of Lot, the sister of Lot and the daughter of Haran, over here we got two different things, because later on we see where Abram explains it and says that she is the daughter of my father, but not of my mother. So this gives rise to the possibility that maybe there were two Mrs. Terahs. There's a Mrs. Terah 1, and there was a Mrs. Terah 2, or a concubine of some sort, or whatever it may be. So here we go, just a little bit different. You have, it's possibility that Sarai was actually the daughter of Terah and another woman who was not Abram's mother. Okay? Two different ways of looking at it. Again, this is the one that that tends to come from the Jews and their writings. But with the understanding that we find in the Scripture, this one makes more sense. If she was, it was still Terah's daughter, but not from Abram's mother. So I'm just giving that to you. You can take a look at that. Do with it what you will. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. We know that Abram is the one that is coming through. So, and the child of promise is going to be born to him. And as God promises, it's going to be born to him and his wife. Not him and his wife's handmaiden. That we find a little bit later on. And that's important. Sarah's jumping the gun. But we'll get into that in just a couple moments, okay? All right, so verse 31, Terah takes Abram his son and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they go forth together from Ur of the Chaldees. They're heading out. If you read the book of Jubilees, it explains part of this, and there's a lot of narrative that goes along with it. They have very fanciful stories about why they left in the first place, what the point of all of it was. That I'm not going to go into it because we don't find it in the book of Genesis, and you can read that if you want to. But as we said, they like to they want to fill in all of the blanks, whether that's accurate or not. And it's a very interesting read. If you get a chance, I encourage you to read it, because it is an interesting read. But for whatever reason, and it's possibly even because of the absolute wickedness of the Chaldean people and where they were, that Terah, whatever was going on in his head, he knew that where he was not a good place. It could have been that there was conflict that was going on, which was constantly going on in that part of the world. It could have been that he was fleeing from conflict. Whatever the reason was, he says, we're all getting out of here, and they're headed towards the land of Canaan. They're headed that direction. But when they come to Haran, and I'll have a map, that's part of my slides, when they come to this little place called Haran, they settle there. And they're there until Abram is called by God. So the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So let's go to chapter 12, because that's what we want to get into. Anybody have anything they want to add or ask before we get going? All right. So Terah has already left Ur, and he has gotten as far as Haran before he dies. So here we find in chapter 12, verse 1, he said, Now the Lord says to Abram, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house. So what is he asking him to leave behind? Everything, right? Everything that he understood, everything that he knew, the customs that he grew up with, the people that he grew up with, everything. This, I think it dovetails nicely but with what the Lord asks us to do in order for us to go into our Canaan land. He asks us to leave everything behind. Anything that might prevent us, anything that might be a draw, might pull us back into it. He says, I want you to leave all of that behind, and I want you to go where I tell you to go. And if you go where I tell you to go, look what he says. Go to the land that I will show you, and here's that first promise, right? There's a threefold promise. He cuts a covenant with Abram. I will make of you a what? Okay, so the first of the threefold promise is a what? A great nation, right? Not I'm going to make you a family, or I'm going to have a little clan that you can call home. What did he say? I'm going to make of you a great nation. This is significant because when we read about the idea of the kings, and we read about kings all the way through the... am I up too far? Okay. When you read about these kings that we read about in the book of Genesis, most of these kings were not kings of this mighty group of people. They were little small city-states. So when we think about the idea, when we see, the king of this and the king of this, think about a man who is probably in charge of 25,000, 30,000. That's about it. But God says, I'm going to make of you a great nation. That encompasses a couple things. Not only is it going to be big, it's going to be powerful. And it's going to be mine. Your nation is going to be my people. All right? So let's think about this. Go a little bit further with this. Anybody need this? Because I'm going to take it out. All right. So here we have in chapter 12, Jehovah God cuts a covenant. Now we talk about it as a threefold covenant. In actuality, he cuts three different covenants with him. All of them are equally important, but he cuts three different covenants with him at this time. He says, I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and to him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. I found that when I talk to people, when I don't so much debate, but I talk to them online, I ask them questions when they post things. I always ask them, what do you mean by that? And there are those who believe that this is in conjunction with the modern nation of Israel. And they look at this nation that he's talking about here, this great nation, is that this is modern day Israel. And those who bless modern day Israel will be blessed, and those who criticize, curse, however you want to refer to it, those who do that will be condemned. They will be cursed for having cursed modern day Israel. Has anybody ever heard that? Anybody ever come in contact with people who say that? Okay, a lot. You have a lot of Zionists, even within the Christian faith, who believe that modern day Israel must be protected because it is still the chosen people of Israel, or chosen people of God. Modern Israel is still the chosen people of God. And that as a country and as a person, I need to bless Israel and to do what I can to make sure that it survives as a nation. That's not what we find here, is it? That's not what we're looking at here. So we have to be very careful when people try to drag the church into these disputes between modern Israel and its neighbors. Do we want those disputes? No. But it's not because they're Israel. It's because those kinds of disputes end up costing lives. They end up costing property. They end up costing all manner of things. And oftentimes we get dragged into these things, and we really have no business getting involved in those things. With this in mind, understand, I'm not saying that we should keep our hands off and not render aid when we can. What I'm saying is, with this in mind, we have to be very careful that we don't get dragged into this quagmire of a theological thing. Okay? All right. So he says, okay, threefold. So number one, he's cut this covenant. He says, you're going to go and you're going to do what I tell you to do, and in doing so, I'm going to make of you a great nation. So that's the first of this covenants that he's going to cut with Abram at this time. And he says, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you. So here he's talking about the man Abram, not his lineage, the man Abram. And we see that here in just a couple of moments, that when someone dishonors Abram by taking his wife, what does he do? What does God do to them? He makes them pay. All right, they have to pay the price for doing this very thing. So it says, and Abram went as the Lord had told him. So does Abram, when that, real quickly, these covenants are what's called a suzerainty covenant. And the word suzerainty simply is this, is sovereign. I can never remember how to spell that word. I got it. Okay. The idea of sovereignty, the idea of a suzerainty covenant. Suzerainty covenant means that the person who extends the covenant is the superior. And the person who accepts it is the inferior. And there's only one way to do this. The person who accepts the covenant, the inferior, has no right to come back and adjust that covenant. God extends the invitation. He extends the covenant. He wants to cut it with Abram. Abram has to make a decision. Am I going to do what God tells me to do, what Jehovah tells me to do, or am I going to remain with my family where they are? He cannot accept the covenant and stay where he is. He must go and do what God tells him to do. You will not inherit the nation. The nation will not come about if you stay where you are, you must leave where you are, your father's house and all of this. You must go where I tell you to go, and I will make of you a great nation. So when Abram gets up and he goes where God tells him to go, is this an acceptance of the conditions of the covenant? Makes perfect sense. So you have the superior extending the covenant to the inferior. The inferior can either accept it or reject it. That's the only power they have. Now, a little bit further on, we're going to see where Abram gets into I guess we could call it the idea of bargaining. He kind of bargains with God over the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Because we see where he says, well, what about this? And God says, well, okay, I'll do that. Well, what about this? And they go, there's a bargaining back and forth. That's not this kind of covenant. This is one that God extends to Abram, and Abram accepts it or rejects it. And we see here that he accepts it. Good for him, right? Oh, and good for us. I think probably more than anything else. So Abram goes. He does as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. So everything that belonged to Terah now is under the control of Abram. And this gets into the concept of the patriarchs at that particular point in time. We cannot overstate how much power and authority the patriarchs had over those who were under their control, who lived in their house. Children, grandchildren, servants, extended family, it all came down to Abram is the guy now. With Terah gone, Abram assumes that mantle of absolute power and control. This kind of gets into the idea about he has under control, but what kind of control do you exercise? If you think about this, I think it's something that helps us to think about when we think about our homes. God just said that the man is to be in control, in charge of the house. The idea of the household. He has authority in that household. The question is, what kind of authority are you going to be in that household? Abraham has every right under this culture to make decisions, to extend olive branches, to arrange marriages, to do all of these things wherever he goes. Abram has utter and complete, total control. And thankfully, Abram was a man that, by and large, was the kind of person that you would want with that kind of control. We see a little bit later on that Moses has that kind of control over the children of Israel until he establishes a hierarchy and he puts other people, helps them put in charge. But the head, he is the head that wears the crown. So now Abram is, now how old is Abram at this point though? Abram's not some young guy, is he? 75 years old. So this is not some young whippersnapper that all of a sudden his dad's left him all this money and he's a kid with no experience whatsoever. This is a man who is up in years. He's seen his father. He's seen how his father deals, and now he has been left in charge. And not only that, he has control of everything that Terah had before. All of the servants, all of the animals, all of the people, everything. Now Abram has control of this big group of people. So he has a lot of responsibility. But I think fairly, by and large, he kind of acquits himself fairly admirably. So we don't have a whole lot to complain about in regards to this. So verse 5, he says, he takes Sarah his wife, Lot his brother's son, all of their possessions, all of the people that they had acquired in Haran. So that means he had servants. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan, right where God tells them to go. So here's a little bit, just a couple of things. Abram passes through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. So when it talks about their idea that they were land, it means that they inhabited the land, they controlled the land. What do we know about the Canaanites? Were the Canaanites a God-fearing, godly people that looked to Jehovah for their behavior and the way that they're supposed to do things? What do we know about the Canaanites? They were, what's that?
But from Cain, right?
Yes, but what kind of people were they? Were they good people? They were wicked people. They were idolaters. They engaged in all kinds of deviant practices, and we're not going to get into all of that. I've got a little thing that I'll print that out and I'll bring it next time, or I'll put it up on the Google Docs and I'll let you take a look at it. They engaged in all kinds of deviant practices, sexual practices, worship. Much of that they dovetailed together. They believed in fertility gods, and they worshipped so that the crops would grow, so that the animals would produce, so that the harvest would be plenty, so that when they went to fish, they would get lots of catch, and all of these kind of things. And so you can imagine anything you could conjure up in your mind, they probably engaged in that. So that's when it talks about the idea of the Canaanites were in the land. That's what it's talking about. They possessed the land, they were in control of the land, and they were a wicked people. So you can imagine as he's passing through, he is seeing all of this type of behavior. Now he's not engaging in it, he's watching it as a sojourner. They're not asking him to participate in it, but that's what they're doing. I think about the idea, if you remember when Paul goes to Rome for the first time. Think about what Paul was used to. Paul was used to Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem, this godly city, this where the temple was up on the mountain. They could see that temple, and you didn't see pagan idolatry everywhere. It was all about God and worship of God. And now he's been removed from Jerusalem by force, and now he's in Rome. And if you ever do a little study about what Roman life was like, not just in Rome itself, but Roman life, here you are in what he would consider to be the belly of the beast. This was Babylon. And all of the wickedness that was told in the old stories about Babylon, now he's in the belly of the beast. Now he sees all manner of wicked things in print, wicked things, the statues and shrines and temples and all of this, and the idolatry and everything like that. And you can imagine what that was doing to him. This pious man is now thrown into this awful place to be. Well, think about this in regards to Abram as he's going towards Canaan. He's going from starting at the top and he's working his way all the way through the bottom. He's seen the wickedness. God says, time is not yet. It's coming, but the Canaanites' time is still not full. They still have a lot more wickedness to go and engage in before I enact my punishment, but it's coming. But I think what God's doing is essentially giving him a guided tour of this place that he is going to give to his progeny, the people that are going to come from his loins. This is going to be the territory that they are going to inhabit. All right, I'm going to tell you this. I'll tell you that to tell you this. What do we think of when we think of the modern? When we see pictures of the modern Middle East, what do we typically see? A lot of sand and a lot of desert. It seems a little desolate at this particular point in time. The more that anthropologists look at the evidences that during the time of Abram and those who came before him, and even up until the divided kingdom, the Middle East, that particular portion of the ancient Near East, was green and it was verdant, it was lush. There was plenty of growing, there was forests, there were large lakes and pieces of bodies of water. It was a much different place then than it is now. So as he's traveling through Canaan and he's seeing all this kind of stuff, his eyes are like this. He said, this is where I'm going to be. This is where we're going to inhabit. And God's saying, yes. Take a look around. Look at these forests. Look at this plain and this lush grass and the places where all of your animals are going to water and your animals are going to graze. And all of this is going to belong to your people. The people that I'm going to take out of you, and I'm going to put them in this place. So he's giving them this guided tour of a very, very, very beautiful place that they're going to inhabit a little bit later on. All right, so in verse 7, the Lord appears to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. All right, so now we've got the first one was the nation promise. The second one now is the land promise. Second of the covenants. All right. Technically, he's already given him the seed promise, so we can go ahead and write that down. Because through him, the nations of the earth will be blessed. That's the seed promise. So at this point, God has promised him 3 different things, and they will only happen if Abram is in obedience to God. If he does what God tells him to do. Doesn't mean he can't mess up. Doesn't mean he can't, err here and there. As long as he continues to do what God tells him to do, God's going to do this for him. All right, let's stop for a second as it is 10 till. Let's stop right now. We'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll come back and we'll finish up.
Sections of 10. Right here.
I'll start reading like this. All right, we're going to get back into it. Here we see where we've got the three promises. And I wrote these out and maybe explained them a little bit better. I may not have been very good at explaining it, so that's on me. So the nation promise is the promise that through Abram there's going to be a large group of people. That's the nation, is the large group of people. And most of that, of course, is going to come from the tribes. When they come out of Egypt, they are numerous, let's just say. Okay? So you're going to have numerous descendants. Then you have the land promise, that's Canaan proper. That's the actual physical property that they are going to possess. He says that's what you're going to do. He says you're going to go in, you're going to possess the land. All right? And then you have the seed promise. The seed promise is the one, of course, that means the most to us because we have no stake in the land, do we? Has anybody ever visited the Holy Land? I call it the Holy Land. Has anybody ever visited there? I plan on going. I'm hoping to go in the next couple of years. I'd love to go over there. But at the end of the day, I say goodbye to it and I fly back home. It means nothing to me. I don't live there. I wish for peace for those people. I wish they could have some semblance of peace. Lasting peace, it would be great. But at the end of the day, that property doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not of any of the tribes. I know that. While I haven't done the 23 and... Me? Thank you. Get that. You want to say 21 and something. I haven't done that, but I know for a fact that I have no Jewish lineage whatsoever. None. So that doesn't mean anything to me. This is the one that we're in. This is the one that means that's something to the Gentile. This is the one. Okay? All right, so through this seed promise, this is the idea that through Abram and successive generations, this is the lineage of Jesus Christ.
Hang on. You just made a statement, and we're debating it back here.
Oh, okay.
I just want to ask.
Okay.
You said in your lineage you don't believe you have any Jewish anything. Don't we all have that? Didn't we all come out of Noah?
Not Jewish.
Not Jewish in the sense of their faith.
Correct.
But are
because not everybody. Well, no, because not everybody ended up becoming part of the Jewish nation. There were generations. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we'll say. But
Yeah.
different between Jew and Gentile.
Yes.
You're right. Keep going.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say because there was a particular group of people that he called out to be that nation of Israel,
Okay.
and then you have a whole group of people, Ishmael. That whole group of people had nothing to do with Judaism whatsoever.
That's right.
But it doesn't mean that God didn't care for him. It just meant that this was the group of people that he called out to be this particular, peculiar people that were close to him as a possession. Okay?
So we're not from Abram and Sarah at all. We're from.
No, we're not from.
No, we're from, I don't know, one of those guys that went off and did awful things. We could be, you think about where all of these people ended up, right? You've got people that inhabited Asia. You got the folks up in Europe. You got the folks that went down like Cush that went down and Ham that fathered a lot of the folks down in Africa. So no, as far as I know, I don't have any heritage whatsoever in Abram and Sarah. You were going to say something, brother?
Well, the nation of Israel, descendants of Jacob, right?
Correct.
So, unless you can trace your lineage
That's
to
it.
him, then
That's it. And it's interesting that, and this is just, I know this is an aside, but I just want to tell you this. This is how little God cared about it. He allowed the temple to be destroyed in 70 AD. And with that temple destruction, all of those records, all of those genealogies, they're gone. They cannot be replicated. They could not be replicated. That's how much God cares about a genealogy. He said all of this was simply to prove the coming of the Messiah. Once that was proven, anything past that point means absolutely nothing to God. Which is good because, like I said, I didn't have anything out of this. I don't have any property over there, and I'm not part of that the descendancy from Abram to Isaac to Jacob to the tribes to anything like that. I don't have any of that, as far as I know. Now I say that, and I'm going to do that 21 and free to go.
Me.
And it's going to prove me wrong. But at the end of the day, even if I can, say I could go back and I could prove my lineage all the way up to Isaac. I mean, if I were able to do that with 100%, you know how much God cares about that? None. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. All right. So here we are. This is what we got. All right. So let's go from here and let's see.
Thank you.
Let's go to. All right. So you're off for me. I will get this land. So this is another important part of Abram's life. As he goes and as he sojourns, where he stops, what does he do? He builds a what? He builds an altar. So this shows that even then, before the law is codified, as far back as even Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, that there were sacrifices being offered up to God. Now, we don't show what those sacrifices necessarily were. We do know that even during the time of the Mosaic Law, there were offerings of wine, there were offerings of grain, there were offerings of cereal, there were offerings of all vegetables and all of this kind of stuff, and there were animal sacrifices that were required at specific times. So we're not going to get hung up in what did Abram offer. We just know that he offered, and he did that in response to God, that being a part of the worship of a monotheistic Jehovah God was something that was passed down. Where did he learn it from? It tells us that Terah likely was a God-fearer, even if he was not solely worshiping Jehovah. He certainly understood him, certainly understood the idea, the concept of sacrifice. You know, Abraham had to learn how to build an altar from somewhere, because it doesn't say God said, hey, build an altar. It says that Abram built an altar. So, all right. So he goes and he offers this, he builds an altar there to the Lord at land of Shechem, at the oak of Moreh. So he builds an altar who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country at the east of Bethel, or Bethel, depending on who you talk to. Some people insist on it being Bethel. So he moves on to Luz, later named Bethel. Beth meaning house, and El meaning God. So this is house of God, Bethel. Something a little bon mot, just to hang on to. Bethel. So if you see a suffix El or a prefix El, it denotes God. All right? So it's later named Bethel by Jacob, a little bit further on. All right, now let's go to verse 10, because I think this shows it shows where Abram starts, and we see, you've heard of a character arc. You know, a lot of times you talk about a book or a movie or a series or whatever it may be. You have what's called a character arc. A character starts at this, and then over the course of the narrative, they arrive somewhere else. Maybe there's personal growth, maybe there's physical growth, maybe there's some sort of maturity or whatever it may be. And I think part of this, we find in verse 10, we see a lack of spiritual maturity, a lack of faithfulness on Abram's part. And we think, this man's 75 years old. How does he not get this? That doesn't matter, right? Has anybody ever seen an older person being foolish? I see it. Is foolishness bound up in the heart of a child? Yeah, but it creeps over into the old folks sometimes. It just happens. Okay? So here we have him. It says, there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. I'm just curious, who told Abram to go down into Egypt? Who told him to lie to Pharaoh? Who told him to do all of these things? Did God tell him to do that? Does God say, hey, it's food's getting scarce, I want you to go down there? Remember what God told Abram he was going to do for him. This is personally, I think this shows a lack of maturity, spiritual maturity, a lack of faith on Abram's part. Now we see later on where Abram is listed amongst in the pantheon of faith, right? But at this point, there's a distinct lack, in my opinion, a lack of faith on Abram's part. Abram could have said, this is where we're going to be, we're going to stay right here, the Lord is going to provide. Because God said what? I'm going to make of you a great nation. He's not going to let him starve to death. Now, he could have said, go down there, but we don't read where God tells him to do this. All right? And it could have just been Abram being pragmatic. You know, there's plenty of food down there. There's nothing right here. We're going to go down there. It doesn't show where God prevented him from going. So it's not saying that it was sinful in going down to Egypt. But I think it shows a little bit of lack of spiritual faith on Abram's part. But anyway, that's just my personal opinion. And, you know, take it for what it's worth. So Abram goes down to sojourn. The famine was severe. The idea of sojourning means this: he does not have a permanent home. He is wandering. He's living in tents. He's living out on the land. He does not have a house with which to dwell. And this kind of brings into mind the idea of the house of God. Remember, for the longest time, the house of God was what? It was a tent called a tabernacle. It was movable. They took it from place to place. And when it was time to have a building, what did God say? Now I want you to build a building for me. Don't do anything before I tell you that it's time to do so. All right, so he goes down. And when he was about to enter Egypt, here he goes. He says to Sarai, his wife, he says, I know that you are a beautiful woman in appearance. I think this is awesome. This Sarah is, what, 10 years younger than him? Right? So, Sarah's a pretty good-looking woman at, I don't know, 70 years old. Not too bad. So, hope for all of us, right? He said, you're a beautiful woman, a woman beautiful in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. And then they will kill me, but they will let you live. At that particular point in time, this might have been a very real concern. It's understandable. Had he not gone down there, he wouldn't have to worry about the Egyptians at all, but that's where we are. Okay? They will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. So here he is worried about losing his life after God just told him, I'm going to make of you a great nation. You're going to have this, your descendants are going to have this land, and through you the nations of the world will be blessed. And now he's worried he's going to die at the hands of these unwashed Egyptians. Makes even less sense. Yes, brother?
Can we stop here for a second?
We can.
Because you said that it was just your opinion
Just my opinion.
about what he did, but it's a big deal. And I think that history doesn't teach that he struggled with a lack of faith at that time. Twice now. And if you bring it back to Saul, King Saul, same thing happened to him. He went against what God had told him to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the history of the kings, all the kings of Israel and Judah. And so it gets me to think, in our day and age, we have all kinds of freedoms. Jesus died to set us free.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder how many times we consider whether we're going to buy a house, whether we're going to move across town. I'm very close to a dear brother, very, very close, for 30 years. And he moved up, he could afford it, he was wealthy. And there is in the Lord's church up there that's close to him. So he's been out of fellowship in the area for a couple of years now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's good for us to remind each other that it is good to ask God, to pray about. Whether it's, I remember as a baby Christian, I had a brother who was an attorney, assistant district attorney. And I remember we were praying together, and he really struggled whether he should buy a BMW or not. He had the money,
Right.
but he had a very good compact car. And so he had to ask for advice and counsel. He ended up not getting one. But we don't do that nowadays. We do what we think is best, what we see others doing. And I think there's a danger there.
There is a danger there. It's how we compare. It's the context in which we see what is good and what's right and what's proper, and oftentimes the standard that we judge what's good and right and proper may not be the correct standard of what's good and right and proper. And you're right. Oftentimes we do not go before God and ask. I'm blessed to be served under a very good eldership, and I think that's one of the rare blessings, unfortunately, in the church now. When you have elders that are forward thinking, they're mindful of everything, and I serve under an eldership, and it doesn't matter what we are thinking or planning to do. There is usually weeks and weeks of prayer and planning before anything ever is done. That's not to say that single thing that's done is the best thing. Sometimes we, even in spite of everything, we still make a mistake and we do the wrong thing. But there's not a lack of prayerful consideration, and that certainly is something that should be in all of our minds, no matter who we are, no matter what it wouldn't matter if I was trying to buy, as the brother was, if I was wanting to buy a BMW or wanting to buy a used Civic. In any case, whatever that is, my mind needs to be on what is God's plan for me, am I seeking what that plan is?
To go even further, the scripture teaches that the man who lacks wisdom should ask the Father
Ask.
to give generously to those who ask without finding
Right.
fault. And staying in that same idea.
No. So you think about if Abram had been thinking clearly, I think, it's for certain he would not, the idea that he was still, I think probably one of the things is he still had maybe even a misunderstanding about what God's promise was to him, okay? We think about it, we think, how could that possibly be? Well, we look at the 12 men who the Savior surrounded himself with, and even up to the eve of his death on the cross, they're still asking, is now when you're going to restore the kingdom? Is now when, are you going to rain down fire from heaven on the Romans? And is this when you're going to ascend to the throne in Jerusalem and everything will be the way that it used to be in these tales of old about David and conquering the... So that goes to show that simply because of proximity to wisdom doesn't mean we always get wisdom. We need to be asking for wisdom, looking for wisdom. Absolutely. But here we go. Here's Abram. He's thinking that, hey, if I go down there, they might kill me. And I'm just wondering if he struggled with that in his mind with the promise that had just been given to him, not so many verses before. I don't know how long exactly this was, but the promise was there. I'm going to make of you a great nation. I'm going to give your descendants land. Through you, the nations of the world will be blessed. And now he's worried that he's going to be killed by these Egyptians. Not likely. God's plan is not going to be thwarted. Not by man, anyway. Okay? God might do something, but mankind can't do anything reasonable to change what God says he's going to do. We could, listen, when it comes time for the world to end, every single Christian in the world could unite in prayer and ask him to turn away from his anger, but you know what? It's not going to happen. He's made that promise and he's going to go through with it. Okay? So here it is. Abram enters Egypt. He's got this arrangement with his sister/wife. The Egyptians saw, he was right, wasn't he? He was right in this. The Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Now, this is interesting. I cannot claim to understand the way the Lord works. But God is going to take this situation and he's going to make it work out for good for Abram. No matter what it is. He makes it work out for good. So they take Sarah into the house of Pharaoh. Now the idea here is that she was taken in as a concubine / common law wife, what we would call that. She's taken in for this reason, in spite of the fact that she's up in years, and it says that she's barren. Okay, so she can't have children, at least not yet, until God gets involved. But they take her in anyway, and it could be this is yet another jewel in Pharaoh's crown. You know, he could bring out his harem of women, and he could show them off to all of his people, and everybody just praise these beautiful women that he's got. But here we see where she's taken in, and in spite of everything, God says, "I'm going." As I said before, those who deal with you dishonorably, I'm going to punish them. Those who bless you, I'm going to bless them. So what happens? The woman was taken into her house, and for her sake, he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. The idea here is, this is not simply that he had those when he got there. These were things that Pharaoh blessed him with while he was there. Not that he certainly had some when he went in, but this is the idea that God is multiplying what Abram has. He's going to despoil Pharaoh, bless it to Abram, and we see here in just a couple of moments, the Lord afflicts Pharaoh and his house with great plagues. Most scholars believe this is a lot like the case of Abimelech, that the women stopped being able to have children. There was a dearth of children born to the house. Could be many other things. You think about the plagues that God visits upon Pharaoh now. May they mirror the plagues that God's going to shower down on Egypt in Exodus? Possibly so. It could be a preview of things to come. Not quite sure. But at the end of the day, God deals harshly with Pharaoh because of his dealing dishonorably with Abram. Now it's interesting that God's going to do this in spite of the fact that this is Abram. Abram's responsible for this. He's the one. If he said, "This is my wife," might they have taken her? Not likely. What is God going to do? God's going to protect Abram. He just said, I'm going to do these things through you. God's not going to let things happen to Abram that he doesn't want to have happen to Abram. It's just it's a convoluted thing, and it could have been very simply taken care of, number one, by never going down into Egypt. Just don't go down there. Nothing good happens in Egypt, apparently. All right? So, Pharaoh calls Abram, summons, the idea of calls him, that means he summons him into his presence and says, what is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? So we have an understanding about why she's there. He says, now then, here's your wife, take her and go. So he expels Abram. He's no longer welcome. Before, he was an honored guest. Pharaoh bestowed blessings upon him. It was almost like the things that he got from Pharaoh were essentially a dowry for his sister. And now he's saying, take your wife that you told was your sister, take her and go. Get out. So they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. All right. Anything anybody wants to add? He got kicked out of Egypt. He's been bounced out of Egypt.
You wonder how he connected the dots, though, that Sarah is the problem.
Oh, good question. And again, if you go into some of the extra biblical writings, the Midrash, they attempt to explain it. That this happened and this person said this and so forth and so on. And it's different from one writing to another. But if you want a very interesting story about exactly what happened, feel free to read some of those writings. But you're right. How did they connect those dots? Was there people who saw what was going on? How did he come to that conclusion? I don't know. But he did, so it could have been something like Abimelech. Remember, God comes to Abimelech in a dream, and he says, look, this woman that you've got, you have no right to her. Give her back to her husband. We don't know that didn't happen, but we're not told that it did. That would make it that'd sum this up very neatly, wouldn't it? It kind of, I'll put a little bow on it. Well, God told him, so. But we're not given that to know, but that's okay. Sarah was delivered back. He did not ask for his stuff back. He just simply says, get out of my country. So he does. All right, perfectly understandable. I'd be pretty upset myself. All right, so let's go to chapter 13. If nobody has anything else they want to add to that. All right. So Abram goes up from Egypt. He and his wife and all, they had all of their property, all of their. It is under. I would say it was commonly accepted that this is where they acquired Hagar. Now, there are different conflicting stories about this. Some place Hagar actually as one of the daughters of Pharaoh, and that was part of what he had bestowed upon him when it talks about servants. One of those was his own daughter. But it does go to show that Pharaoh and Abram, this was not just simply a transactional type of thing. There was actually a relationship between the two of them. They respected one another. And one of them was dealing dishonorably with Pharaoh, and he shouldn't have been doing that. I'm not saying that this is 100%, but this is a commonly held belief that Hagar was one of Pharaoh's daughters, and she was given to Sarah as a handservant, and apparently Pharaoh didn't want her back when he kicked out Abram. So anyway, they go up all that they have and Lot with them into the Negeb. The Negeb is the land south of Canaan, and that'll be on the maps that I will eventually put up. So it says Abram was very rich in livestock and silver and gold, and that's no wonder. He inherited all that Terah had. He had his own stuff when they left Ur. He took Terah's stuff when Terah died in Haran, and now he's got all of this wealth from the Pharaoh. So, what did God say He's going to do to him? He said, "I will make of you a great nation." He said, I'm going to multiply you. I'm going to bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you. So, he journeys on from the Negeb as far as Bethel. He goes back up to Bethel, where he made his tent in the beginning between Bethel and Ai. We read about Ai a little bit further on, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. So he goes back up where his altar is. And there he calls upon the name of the Lord. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them. Where would Lot have gotten his stuff from? His father, right? Father that died before Terah ever left Ur of the Chaldees. His father died, so Lot would have inherited all of his father's stuff. So both of we have. I think sometimes we underplay Well, the amount that these people had, these are not guys traveling around with a couple of bucks in their pocket and some sheep and goats here and there. We're talking about basically a small nation, and they're all traveling around together. Lots of people. And in this case, you're talking about male and female servants, and many of those male and female servants were married to one another. They were having children, so you had children born within the household. So when it talks about Abram's household, it's not just including his wife and his nephew and those people. We're talking about male servants and female servants and all of the herdsmen, and he had hired hands that went with him. And we're talking about a large group of people that are traveling. And this kind of gets into this, what we're going to talk about here in just a second. When you've got that big of a crowd of people and you've got goods, you've got flocks, and you've got herds, and you're all trying to dwell together in peace and unity, and it doesn't always work the way you want it to. Okay? So this kind of gets into this, what we're getting ready to talk about. So Lot, who went, yes ma'am.
So, you said before when Abram may have had a little lapse in faith and he went on down out of the Negev and went to Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
If he is the Bekor, or he is the leader of all these people, and you're describing it as so many people, and there's a famine, could it have been that he felt the responsibility to provide for them?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. It says that that's why they went down there, because there was a famine in the land. And if you look at the maps when you would leave the Negev, the south part of Canaan, and you would start coming into Egypt, that is at the mouth of the Nile River, and that's the land of Goshen. That's where all of the crops, the greenery, the pasture land, and all of this kind of stuff. That's another thing you can't discount, is the amount of food that was produced by Egypt. It was an enormous amount of food, and that little mouth where the Nile comes in is huge. So all of this food is being produced, and Egypt, I know we think about Egypt as being this densely populated. It was not a very densely populated country compared to other countries at the time. It was very powerful because the people were intelligent, they were educated, they were trained to fight, but they were not incredibly populous. So they had this enormous amount of food, and they had no problem selling it to anybody that came along. We don't want you to die. We'll sell you grain. We'll sell you wheat. We'll sell you all of these things, and that's what they did. To go down, number one, with the herds to graze, and then to buy food, as we find later on with the 12 sons going down to Egypt to buy food from Pharaoh. So yeah, absolutely. I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that it was anything other than it's a survival thing. We've got all these people, and there's a famine. We've got to feed them somehow. We might be able to tighten our belts a little bit, but at the end of the day, we've got to get food into these people's bellies, and we got a lot of folks to feed. So, all right. So Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. So I don't know how big the size of their flocks and herds are, but they were too big that they would be able to find watering holes and pasture lands that both sets of flocks and herds could support together. They needed to split up, they needed to separate, and each go and find a place that they can host their families and all of their livestock. So there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. So we don't see here where there's a problem between Abram and Lot. There's a problem with the people that are working for Abram and Lot. And when you get far enough separated and the master is not there keeping an eye on things, I can imagine the idea of the strife here is not limited to catcalling across away from each other and yelling at each other and and oaths and that kind of thing. There was probably maybe a little bit of fisticuffs, as typical of guys that work out in the field like that. They're kind of rough. So when there was arguments, hey, you watered first last time. You've muddied up the water, now our sheep can't drink. So there's an ongoing strife between those groups of men. Now, this shows the wisdom of these older men. Remember, these guys are getting up in age. They're a lot wiser and they're a lot smarter than these young guys that can't, keep it together. So there was strife. And at that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram says to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen." I like that. Abram's got his head on straight. "Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, I'll go to the right. If you take the right hand, I'll go to the left. The map that I've got, when you look at the land of Canaan, and I'll show this and I'll point it out, the land that Lot goes towards is to the right-hand side. Abram goes up a little ways and to the west. Up and to the east. Lot goes towards the... I'm going to get that wrong. Okay. Abram goes up and to the west. Lot goes up and to the east. And where he ends up is very dangerously close to the plain that contained the 5 cities that Sodom and Gomorrah were part of. And it shows a tendency of people to want to eventually move into town. At first he's out, he's shepherd, he's got the flocks, he's got the herds, and then before too long you see where Lot has made his way, and he's known in the gates of the city. So he's not maintaining his distance the way he needs to from this place, these places of wickedness. All right. So Lot lifts up his eyes and sees that the Jordan Valley was well watered, right? Everywhere like the garden of the Lord, like I said. This was a green, beautiful place. Plenty of places to water and feed their livestock. So this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and I'll show that on the map. So Lot chose for himself all of the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Now I want you to think about that for a couple moments. He separates himself from Lot, and he gives Lot first choice. I think, part of this, I think this is maybe a little bit of his faith developing a little bit further. It's like, hey, whatever Lot chooses, God's going to make sure that I'm taken care of. I could go to the arid desert, and God's going to make sure that I'm taken care of. Maybe his faith is beginning to develop even more understanding the idea of the promises. But I think this is kind of a big deal, because here you have this older man with Lot, who is still ostensibly under his directorship, under his leadership, and here's this older man giving the younger man preference, and this was just simply not done. Abram had every right to say, I'm going over here, you go over there. I'm not giving you a choice. You go over there because I'm going over here. So Abram had every right to have that first choice, but he gives it up to Lot. Now, I think that has a lot to do with his steady maturity. It's hard to think about it. A man his age, he's still working towards maturity, but sometimes that's the case. Sometimes that's the case. All right? Let's see. So, they separated from one another. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled amongst the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now here it says, even in verse 13, the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. What was the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? What's that? I didn't hear you.
Homosexuality.
That's one of it. Absolutely.
Idolatry.
What's that?
Idolatry.
Idolatry, certainly. What else?
So you name it, it's there.
Okay, I think that's probably it more than anything else, is whatever you can think of, whatever you can imagine, the wickedness, which shows that the wickedness of the world was not limited to Canaan. Canaan simply had to be was the land where God was going to send the Israelites. All right? And the wickedness was there, and God was going to drive it out. But this wickedness was widespread. Every part of the world was engaging in this, which shows that in the short period of time, relatively speaking, the short period of time from when Noah and his descendants came off of that ark, still believing in the one God, worship had yet been, once again, been concentrated on God and God alone, the world had been filled up with wickedness. All right? So here's Lot. He goes over and is, as I said just a couple moments ago, he pitches his tent as far as Sodom. So he's getting as close as he possibly can. Something that you can write down. One thing you can't understate is the draw of these places to the people of the time. This was, we think of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all we think about it is in terms of their wickedness, and their wickedness was great before God. But at this point, it was like moving in town. All of the art, all of the culture, all of the writings, all of the neat things that were very much a draw to people who had never seen anything like that before. So you can imagine, you go up and you see this place, and it's the buildings are big, the houses are really nice. All the people seem very, very cosmopolitan, very metropolitan. They all seem very intelligent and learned, knowledgeable. intelligent people. They do things differently, and part of that is the draw of how they worship and who they worship. It was very much an enticing type of thing. While you may not participate in it, you want to be as close as you possibly can so that you can see it and enjoy the culture, even while they're engaging in the kind of wickedness that they're engaging in. So Lot's moving, he's inching forward, inching closer, till he's basically in Sodom's back door. He's right there, and he's watching all of it occur. And then we see later on that he's known in the city. You know, the men of Sodom know him, and they acknowledge that. You know, you came to this place, and then they begin, of course, to want to kill him as much as they want to kill his visitors. So when we think about this, we wonder, why would he do that? And it's because it was civilization. As wicked as it was civilization, and that's a draw. Yes, sir.
Well, Peter describes it as he was tormenting his righteous soul day after day.
You wonder what that...
Living so close to them.
Yep. And you think he was doing this, and it would have been a simple matter to say, I'm going back to nature. I'm going to go back to living in my tent. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. But he continued to get inch closer and closer to it. Yes, ma'am.
And that always has troubled me. It's like, if he was so troubled in his righteous heart, why was he going to be near?
Yeah.
But
I think, and part of it is he could have involved himself so much in the affairs of the city as a merchant and as a trader that he knew he shouldn't be there, but now he's caught up in it. Not that he was engaging in their sin, but that now he's like he can't get out of it. I've entangled my affairs up in this area so much that now I can't go away. Now I can't make a clean break from it. I don't know, there's a lot of different things wrapped up in this whole narrative. Yes, sir.
There's several passages that come to mind. God said that he would destroy the wisdom of the world, and friendship with the world is enmity toward God. And you're also told in Romans, do not conform to the patterns of the world. All of those things were happening there, and they couldn't see it. But before we, throw stones at this idea, Satan is the prince of lies, and he really messed up with Lot's mind and the people, God's people. And it's the same thing that could happen to us if we're not careful. And
Oh,
it happens
absolutely.
It happens gradually, doesn't it?
It does. It's like the proverbial frog in the pot, right? You crank you crank up the heat, and little by little, that frog has no idea it's being boiled alive until it's dead. It's inch by inch, little by little, degree by degree, and before too long, you're done for, and you don't even realize that it's happening. That's how you think about how many people have left the church in just that way. It's slowly by degree. At first, I quit doing this, and then I quit doing this, and I quit doing this, and then before too long, I'm completely removed, and I have no idea, or don't even remember how long it took me to get to where I am. So it is a terrible thing. Real quick, we'll go to Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. The idea of Sodom, and oftentimes because of what happened to the two angels and Lot and his daughters and his family, we oftentimes kind of narrow in, we focus in on the idea of the sexual sin, the concept of homosexuality certainly being one of their sins. But if you look at Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49, it says, "Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and the needy." So, certainly that the sin of those men of Sodom, but I believe part of that is simply the idea. I don't think that it said that all the men of the city, so I don't think that every single man in that city was a homosexual. I think that this was a behavior that they were engaged with because they could. It was something that they could do. There was nothing to be done for it, and no one was stopping them from doing it. So you wonder how many people had wandered into these towns in this area only to be set upon by men who are vicious, cruel, mean-spirited, hateful, degenerate, certainly. But look at what he says. He said they had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease. So we're talking about a town where it was very, very metropolitan, very, very cosmopolitan. And probably people who walked in, it's like the person from out in the sticks. They go into the big city for the first time. They're wandering around, with their mouth open, looking at all the tall buildings. I remember I had friends from school that came home with me, and none of them had ever seen a skyscraper before. So I took them down to downtown Atlanta, which was essentially at that time like going into Sodom. So I take them down there, and they walked around, and they're just, oh wow, and I was like, it's not that big of a deal, but to them it was. Ooh, this is great. This is fantastic. This is high living, city living. So anyway, all right. So let's go back to verse 14. The Lord says to Abram after Lot had separated from him. This is not something that happened overnight. They have to separate all those herds and flocks. They have to get everybody together, and then they're heading for the plain. Lift up your eyes and look from all the place where you are. Look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. So here he is in Canaan. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. Now be careful. I want you to put a little pin in that word forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. Arise, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abram moves his tent, comes and settles by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and that's where we get the term Hebrew from. We call him a Hebrew because he was from Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord. So this is the place he set up his tent. This is where he's going to live for a while. He's not building a house. He's living in tents, but that's where he is. Remember, he's still a sojourner. He's still a sojourner in the land. All right, so let's look at this. I want to look real quickly while we got a few minutes. At the last part of verse 15, for all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. Now you think about the idea. What false doctrine have you heard in regards to this idea about this land being given to his descendants forever? Anybody got it?
It's to do with the kingdom, ain't it?
What's that?
Is it to do with the kingdom coming back?
Yes, the idea here that, again, getting back to the idea of physical Israel, that the land of Israel belongs to the Jews. It will always belong to the Jews. God will defend the Jews. He will punish those who seek to hurt the Jews. He will reward those who help them. That's why we get a lot of people in our country that believe that no matter what, we need to be assisting. So far, and I'm not getting into the geopolitical aspect of it, but that's the concept, is the idea that the word here forever means in perpetuity until the end of time. Unfortunately, that's not what the word forever here means. And that's key. So real quick, did everybody get this? By the way, Sarai, there are different thoughts, and I don't like to get into too much in the idea of the meaning of names, but McClintock and Strong believe that Sarai, in Sarah's name before it's changed, means contentious. And if you look at her behavior a little bit further on down the road, you can certainly see where they might get that idea from. She was a little bit of a contentious person. All right, so I'm going to erase this because I want to write this up here. I think I'd call Sarai more impatient than anything else. All right. So the idea here, forever. All right. When we think about the idea of forever, whether or not we're engaging in hyperbole, we're exaggerating for the sake of exaggeration, for the sake of effect. When we think about the word forever, what do we think of? What in our mind, when we think about the term forever, what does it mean?
Eternally.
Okay, eternally. It's always going to be that way, right? Always. Eternally. In perpetuity. All right? That's the concept when we think about the idea of the word forever. The term forever in the Hebrew, when you do the etymology of it, when you really look at what the word means, it means this. Age lasting. Age lasting. Now, with that in mind, how does that change verse 15 now? When we look at that word now, when we look at it with the idea of age lasting, how does that change how we look at that verse? Does it still mean what some want it to mean? Okay, so let's you think, okay, great, it's no longer forever, it's age lasting. What does age lasting mean? It means that it is in effect as long as it needs to be in effect. That's like, it would be the equivalent of me saying, I broke my arm, you're going to have to wear that cast forever. It doesn't mean I have to wear the cast for the rest of my life until I die. They're going to cut that cast off of my dead body. That's not what I'm saying. You're going to wear that cast until you don't need to wear the cast anymore. It means age lasting. The translation, the word that they chose when they translated the text is not probably the best word to be chosen. But it made sense because the length of time that they're talking about here is a long period of time. Long period of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So when you think about that, especially at that particular point in time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of years, that's longer than we can even think further down the road. To them, it is the equivalent of saying it's going to be forever. You know, how long is this pain? I'm going to have this pain forever. I'm going to have this headache forever. No, you're going to have it until the headache goes away. So with that in mind, God says, I'm going to give you this land. He said, I will give you, for all the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring as long as you're going to possess, as long as you need to possess it, as long as you're supposed to possess it. It's not going to be in perpetuity forever and ever, amen, eternally. No. Because eventually it's not going to belong to you, is it? He says, I'm going to give it to you forever, but then what happens? You have the Assyrians who come down and conquer it. You have the Babylonians who come into conquer it. And even before then, you have the nations that surrounded the nation of Israel. They came in and took portions of it and subdivided and annexed part of it, and then they were driven back. And then they came in again. They driven back. And then before too long, the nation of Israel is taken away. And guess what? They never again possessed the land the way they used to possess the land. Certainly not the entire land of Canaan the way they used to possess the entire land of Canaan. Even when they came back out of captivity, during that period of time where the Maccabees basically ruled and had control of the region, they didn't have all of it, and it was a very tenuous grasp on it in the first place. So one of two things. Either God is lying when he says you're going to possess it forever, or he doesn't mean what we think we're reading when we say he's going to possess it forever. Which one is more likely? Is God lying, or are we misunderstanding what we're reading because of maybe not the very best translation of the word? I think it's far more likely that we're having maybe a misunderstanding about the word that's being used. It's not being used in the sense that we understand it. So it makes a big difference. It says you're going to possess it, but only until I decide that you don't need to possess it anymore. That it doesn't mean anything anymore. It's not going to matter anymore. Did the Jews possess the land during the time of Christ? No. It was Palestine. It belonged to Rome for all intents and purposes. And the Jews can sit there and say, well, it really belongs to us. No, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the Romans. To the victor go the spoils. They came in and they just spoiled it, and now it belongs to them. After they're gone, it's going to belong to someone else. And you're never going to get it back the way that you think you're going to get it back. And that's when you answer people, when people talk about that. Yeah, but God made a promise. He did make a promise, and he kept his promise. That land promise was delivered forevermore. He's not slight concerning his promises. When he says he's going to do something, he does it. But then God has the right to say, it's time, it's over.
I've heard that too, and I've heard that God hasn't given it to them yet totally because they've been in captivity. It's things such as that. So it's coming, but Joshua 21:43, I remember this scripture.
Yeah.
You might have mentioned it, I might have missed it, but
No, I didn't.
the Lord gave unto Israel all the land which he swore to give to their fathers, and they possessed it and dwelt therein. I mean, it's pretty plain and clear.
I don't know how that's not ambiguous at all, is it?
Yeah.
Everything he said he was going to do, he did.
Yeah.
And when God, and listen, he says, if you look, and we're not going to go into that because it's in another book and that's not what we're covering. He says, guess what? He tells them in advance what they're going to do. He tells them, you are going to do this. You are going to disobey. You're going to be in opposition to me. And when that comes, this is what I'm going to do. And part of it is to remove them from the land. The land is going to expel you like it's going to expel the Canaanites. Because I know you. I love you, but I know how you are. And this is what you're going to do. And this is what's going to happen when you do what I know you're going to do. But until then, until that time comes, it's yours. It belongs to you. But we see from the very beginning, and again, this gets into the book of Exodus and then, of course, the book of Joshua, that even when they went into the land, from the very beginning, they didn't do what he told them to do. He says, I want you to expel all of the people of the land, and they didn't do it. I want you to do this, and they didn't do it. I don't want you to intermarry. They intermarried. So from the very beginning, I think he gave them a lot of leeway, and they proceeded to take it and spit on it. So, all right. So with that, anybody got any questions or comments about that? Yes, sir.
No, but if you go back just a little bit where Abram and Lot separated,
Mm-hmm.
so how does that affect Abram being the patriarch? What happened there?
When they separate, it's Lot. He essentially gives Lot. He's releasing him from his authority. He says, "You go your way, and you are now in control of yours and your property and your everything like that." When I say that Abram had control, it doesn't mean that Lot was just the subservient man in Abram's household. It means that Lot deferred to Abram when there were decisions to be made, if they decided where they were going to go. Lot deferred. It doesn't mean that Lot had no control over anything in his household. And I don't want to make that. I don't want to give that the wrong impression. Lot was the patriarch of his own family. He had control over that. But at the end of the day, Abram had veto power. He had the ability to hand down decisions. And Lot, being a good man, gave into authority when it was time for him to do so. But what we read about Abram, this was not a matter of dance puppet. You're going to do what I tell you to do. It was just simply, at the end of the day, Abram had ultimate authority. The buck stopped with him. But when he released Lot, when he said, "You go your way and we're going to go ours, you choose," when they separated like that, it's essentially Abram saying, "God bless. You are now, you're not under my authority anymore." Could Lot have still come and said, "Hey, I've got a question. Can we help each other out with this?" He certainly could have done that, and Abram would have. I'm fairly sure, based on what we see about Lot when he and his household were carried away, that Abram still cared about Lot a great deal. Still loved his nephew. Still wanted what was best for him. And that was nothing that Lot did wrong. He just was in the wrong place at the wrong time and got carried away. And Abram had to mount up a posse and go after him. Did a good job with it too. Which is also kind of interesting. You talk about a household. This is a man who not only had servants, he had trained fighters. He had not only great amounts of land or great amounts of wealth, but he also had men that were trained to protect his wealth. So again, this is like a small city-state moving around. It's kind of impressive when you think about that. And then you think about how they were expanded in Egypt, and as they come out, you're talking about just this huge horde of people that are coming up out of Egypt. All right, let's see. Tell you what, we got a couple of minutes. But you know what? Let's not do it. Let's not do it. Because at 14, we're going to get into some stuff, and I don't want to stop in the middle of it. So, anybody going to be upset if we knock off 4 minutes early? All right, thanks, guys. I will try to get this up in a Google Doc, and then I'll send a link out to everybody so that you can go and you can look at it. Hopefully, my slides are still good from when I made them last night. I just can't find them, so I'll get those up, and you can take a look at those. Thank you.